Hey guys, it's Brother John checking in for Wednesday in the Word. It's just like it's summertime again, right? Of course, we've got the church closed down for our in-person gatherings until November the 22nd. So here we are back for our Wednesday videos, and to quote that famous philosopher Han Solo, didn't we just leave this party? But here we are. So what I want to do for today and Wednesday in the Word is just continue to do what we've been doing on Wednesday nights. We've been going through the pastoral epistles, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. And we're in the section of 1st Timothy where he is giving qualifications for pastors and deacons. And if you were here last Wednesday night, or if you watched it online, we talked about the qualifications for pastor, and Paul gets pretty detailed going through there. Just glancing over it, he talks about how pastors are to be above reproach, and the husband of one wife, and temperate, and prudent, and respectable, and hospitable, and able to teach. And so he spends a lot of time talking about that. In these verses today, he's going to talk about the office of deacon. There are two New Testament offices, two church offices that are specified in the New Testament, and that is pastor and deacon. And so right back to back, Paul is telling Timothy, here's what qualifies someone to serve in these offices. And so I want to read to you, this is 1 Timothy 3, 8 through 13, about what it means to be qualified as a deacon. So here we go. Here it says, Paul writes, deacons likewise must be men of dignity, not double-tongued, or addicted to much wine, or fond of sordid gain, but holding to the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience. These men must also first be tested, then let them serve as deacons if they are beyond reproach. Women must likewise be dignified, not malicious gossips, but temperate, faithful in all things. Deacons must be the husbands of only one wife and good managers of their own children and their own households. For those who have served well as deacons obtain for themselves a high standing and great confidence in the faith that is in Christ Jesus. And so that's the qualification for deacons. And let me say, before I even really get started in going through this, we are blessed here at our church. We have a group of godly deacons who love the Lord and love their families and love this church and serve in a lot of different ways behind the scenes and in ministry and just little things like phone calls or hospital, back when we could do hospital visits and things like that. And so we just have a good group of men that God has placed in that position. So let's just walk through some of these real quick and see what we can see. So it starts out, and he names the office. He says, deacons likewise must be men of dignity. The word for deacon is an interesting word. It just means servant or server. If you trace it back in its use in Greek, sometimes it literally refers to like a waiter, somebody who waits tables. And the idea, it's in the root of it, just means to serve. And so that's what a deacon does. A deacon is a servant within the local church, but it's a specific office of servant. So he gives those details. He says, deacons likewise, so he's referring back to the pastor. He's saying, I just gave you the qualifications for pastor, so now I'm going to give you qualifications for deacons. And they're actually quite similar, except there's nothing in the qualification for deacon that talks about the ability to teach. But a lot of the other things are parallel. So he says, deacons must be men of dignity, so dignified, have a sense of what's right and wrong and how to conduct oneself, that sort of idea. And then he says, not double-tongued. It's an interesting word, double-tongued there. It literally is a combination of the word two, like TWO, like two things, and to say. So to say two things. In other words, to say one thing and do another. That idea. We would use the term that we're not to be two-faced. That's kind of the way we express that term nowadays. And so he's not to show one way that he's godly and a loving father and husband and a servant to the church, and then actually be another way. So there's to be some integrity there in who he is. So not double-tongued or addicted to much wine. they drank wine differently back then. It was a much lower grade of alcohol than we have now. And water was not good. And so they had to, it contextually, it's not the same thing when you and I talk about alcohol. And I don't believe, I think as far as alcohol goes, you've really got to think about what does it mean to be a witness for Christ? What does it mean to make your brother stumble? And so I don't think a believer, a Christian, should drink. Now, there are a lot of believers who disagree on that, and I understand that, but that's where I've come to. I know that's sort of the traditional Baptist way, but I'm not that way because I'm just a Baptist. I just think that as far as our witness goes, that's something that we need to avoid. However, back then it was not the same thing. Alcohol was a different sort of deal. In fact, Paul would talk to Timothy about it later in the book. And so he talks about being addicted to wine. Literally, the idea of addiction means to pay attention to it. A deacon is not to pay attention to wine. He's not to let that come into his life and dominate his life. And so really in a lot of ways, the idea there is anything that gets us, whether it's, alcohol. I mean, how many of us are addicted to caffeine? You ever really stop and think about that? We'll just move on from there, right? Food, sugar, whatever it might be, those things that are addictive and can impact our walk with the Lord. He says, don't let that stuff get you. So then he mentions fond of sordid gain. Not exactly clear how a deacon would have the opportunity for sordid gain. So maybe at the time they would have been involved in the offering and the distribution of it. I think that's probably accurate. And maybe one writer said maybe they had opportunities for embezzlement if they wanted to. I don't know. But whatever it was, there was some opportunity there where they could have taken advantage of the system and had some sort of monetary gain. He says that's not who we want here. We want people who aren't looking for that. So these are really character issues because it comes down to verse 9. But holding to the mystery of the faith, or the mystery of the faith, with a clear conscience. When he says mystery there in the New Testament, the idea of mystery is something that's already in place that has just been slowly revealed over time and now is being revealed fully. And so the idea is that deacons absolutely hold to the core beliefs of Christianity. These are people who believe the Bible, who believe that Jesus is the Son of God, who believe, all that foundational theology. That's who they are. Your doctrine has to be right in order to serve as a deacon. And so they hold to that. Because in verse 10, he starts to go into some things. He says, these men must also first be tested, and then let them serve as deacons if they are beyond reproach. This idea of testing is an interesting one. Paul would say to Timothy later in the book, in 1 Timothy 5, 21 and 22, don't be too hasty to lay hands on somebody. Don't be too hasty to set someone apart for service. Some time needs to pass. This is one of the reasons in the qualifications for pastor, it's addressed in the way of he's not to be a new convert. And so to be a deacon, there has to be a testing process. And some of that is informal, where the church has observed somebody's life, they've seen that it's consistent. And I know within our church, we ask for deacon nominations. Once that happens, our deacon body, and I'm involved in this too, have a time to sit down with somebody and talk about their beliefs and talk about who they are, and they're tested in that way before we ordain them as deacons or ask them to serve as deacons. But here the idea is this person has lived their faith out where the church has recognized that. I have always said in my ministry, in every church I've ever served, you never call someone to be a deacon who is not already a deacon in every way except by name. You only call somebody who already exhibits all of these things, someone who's already a servant, that just the last step would be for the church to recognize, hey, you're already, a deacon in every way of your life, in your conduct, in your family life, and all of that, and how you serve the church. So let's make it official and make you a part of this group of people. What you should never do is say, well, that seems like they're a nice family, and he seems like a nice man. Let's make him a deacon, and then they'll get more involved, or he'll find his place to serve. You're asking for disaster when you do that. You find people who are already deacons. They just haven't been, made formally a deacon yet. I hope that makes sense. And then he begins to talk about their wives. Verse 11 says, women must likewise be dignified, not malicious gossips, but temperate, faithful in all things. The word, depending on what translation you're looking at, it may say women, it may say wives. That my New American Standard here says women, and then if you go to the footnote, it says either deacons' wives or deaconesses. Some people will make an argument that for female deacons, and the problem with that is the context of the paragraph. He's clearly talking about men. The last thing I want to do is hinder, females serving the Lord, but you have to make sure that you do what the text says. And so, to me, it's very clear the context of 8 through 13 is he's talking about deacons, about men, because he talks about there to be men of dignity. And then in verse 12, deacons must be the husband of only one wife. So here in verse 11, it would be weird for Paul to suddenly start talking about female deacons without telling us, hey, I'm about to start talking about female deacons, and then suddenly switching back without warning to talk about that the deacon is to be the husband of one wife. So if you're the husband of one wife, you're clearly a dude, right? Well, I know nowadays, but back then that was pretty clear. So he's talking about the wives here, and they're to be dignified like the husbands are, not malicious gossips. One of the things that happens when you're involved in deacon ministry and in pastoral ministry, our pastors' wives, like Donna and others, and deacons' wives, is that you hear about a lot of the things that are going on in church life. You hear about what's happening in people's lives. And so you've got to be able to keep confidences and to make sure that you don't gossip about those things. And so it's important, but temperate, faithful in all things. In other words, a godly man with a godly wife is what he's talking about here. So then he talks about their marriage. He says deacons must be husbands of only one wife. So no divorced deacons. I know that can, today, there's always that worry about, how are we going to find men to serve? People are, there's so much divorce. Well, the word is the word, and you never force anything just because you say you have to have a certain number of deacons, or we've got to do this, or we've got to do that. Here it is, with a husband of one wife, in which I've always fallen in the traditional camp. He's talking about not being a divorced person. We could go into great detail there, another time, another day, but there's even more to that as well, and that is he's faithful in his marriage. He's a good husband. He loves his wife as Christ loves the church. You may have a guy who has never been divorced, but is a jerk to his wife. You don't call that guy his deacon. He's just as unqualified to be a deacon as anybody, as any other thing that disqualifies you as deacon. So it must be the husband of one wife, good managers of their children and their own household. This is similar to what he would say about pastors. Because the church is a family, we are a part of God's family. There is that sense of, if you're not living it out at home, you're not going to live it out at church. If you're not getting it right at home, you're not going to get it right at church. And so God gave us a couple of things before we fell into sin. He gave us marriage, so the home. Even Adam and Eve were told to be fruitful and multiply, and he gave us work. And so those are foundational things. And so how a person conducts his life as a husband and as a father has as much to do for his qualification as a deacon as anything else. And so it's important that he's godly in those areas. And so verse 13, he wraps it up. For those who have served well as deacons obtain for themselves a high standing. I mean, how many, we've all known godly deacons over the years that are just champions of the faith and have done things behind the scenes that have means that churches have been able to go on and thrive. I mean, it's a special thing to be able to be in that office. So for those, this is verse 13 again. For those who have served well as deacons obtain for themselves a high standing and great confidence in the faith that is in Christ Jesus. Deacons are so important. The church watches them. Kids know who they are because they see them up front, like passing out the Lord's Supper and praying or whatever it might be. I can think of deacons in our church where I grew up, just godly men who loved the Lord and loved the church and just served in every way they could. These are giants of the faith. They may have never preached a sermon. They may have never taught a Sunday school class. They may have never led a committee, and yet they faithfully served as a deacon and did all those things that God called them to do. and those churches were much better off and were healthy and had that godly influence because of these men. The basic idea I wrote is to be a deacon is to be a godly servant. To be a deacon is to be a godly servant. And so I think the example for all of us, even if we can't be deacons, those of you who are in a position where you can't do that, is simply this: we can all be servants and we can all live godly lives if we know Christ, if He's made the difference, if the gospel has changed us, if the Holy Spirit lives in us. And so for those of you who are deacons who are watching, you have a responsibility to serve and to do it in a godly way and to do it with dignity. And your wives have that same responsibility to live with dignity and to do the things that Paul here tells them to do. It's a great office. It's one not to be taken lightly. It's a gift from God, the office of deacon. I know as pastors, sometimes we like to tease about deacons, and deacons like to tease pastors. It's just natural how we do. But I'm so grateful for our group that we have here. We have a great group of guys who love the Lord, and we as a church should be grateful for them. And so here's what I would say is wherever you're called to serve in the church, whether it is as a deacon or whether it's in some other capacity, do it with dignity. Do it while holding to the mystery of the faith. Do it while not being double-tongued. Be who you are. All of these standards are ones that you and I, if we know Christ, we can live up to. Well, guys, that is this week's Wednesday in the Word. We'll do one more next week, and then we'll start back in-person meetings on Sunday the 22nd. And although that next Wednesday after that is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, so if I'm going to pull my calendar up real quick. Hey, I got a text while we were doing this. I won't tell you who it is. It's from a church member, but I won't tell you who texted me. The next time we're going to meet in person on Wednesday night, believe it or not, will be December the 2nd. So it's going to be a while before Wednesday night meets in person, because we won't meet the 18th next Wednesday because we're still not meeting in person. We're going to be back on Sunday morning in person on November the 22nd, but then that's Thanksgiving week, and so we're not going to meet on Wednesday the 25th, which is the day before Thanksgiving. So it's going to be a while before we're back together on Wednesday night. So, you'll get to see me some more Wednesday in the Word, sort of, mid 2020 style. Well, guys, hope the rest of your day goes well. So that is 1 Timothy 3, 8 through 13. We'll pick up, I think we're just going to look at 3 verses next week, 14 through 16, sort of a summary of doctrine. But anyway, y'all stay safe out there. Wear your mask. Stay indoors if you need to. If you need to quarantine, do those things that you need to do to keep yourself safe. And I will see y'all online on Sunday. I'll be preaching the message just like we're here now. We won't be in the sanctuary or anything. It's just going to be me and my computer, and we'll continue in the missionary journeys, the story of Paul and Silas and the Philippian jailer and all that goes into that. Well, I've talked enough, and I'm not sure how long the video is, but I've said about all I want to, or well, really all I need to. I could go on for a while, but y'all stay safe out there, and we'll see you Sunday online.